The desperate and anguished search intensified with each passing minute as they failed to find her. Despite his relentless efforts, luck was not on his side. That same day, around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the neighbors began reporting a strange smell of burning meat, accompanied by a bonfire in the yard of a local man named Adolfo Arrieta Garcia. Concern quickly spread in the neighborhood, as many knew Adolfo had been born and raised there with his parents and a younger brother. As he grew older, he inherited a portion of his parents' property, built his own house, and married a woman named Carmen, with whom he raised 2 children. Backwilder, to neighbors who had known him for years affectionately called him El Negro, the black man. But he was a hard-working, introverted man whom many trusted. Though not talkative, he never failed to greet or treat others with kindness. His presence, though quiet, was a familiar constant in the neighborhood. However, that quiet man, who only socialized with a few friends while playing billiards, suddenly began to exhibit changes in his behavior. He frequently argued with his wife to the point that he was charged with personal injury and threatening her with a firearm. His wife, unable to bear it any longer, left him, taking their youngest daughter with her. At the age of 55, Adolfo continued living in the same house with his 19-year-old son, working as a truck driver transporting milk. Yet, as time passed, he became more withdrawn, spending increasing amounts of time listening to music and drinking alone in his house. His emotional state deteriorated further, exacerbated by work-related issues. His truck had suffered a mechanical breakdown, forcing him to stop working, deepening his financial crisis. By September 2018, he had been unemployed for 2 months. At fateful Friday, the day Genesis disappeared, events unfolded with terrifying speed. The police arrived at Adolfo's house, and the man, appearing calm and composed, opened the door with unsettling ease. He claimed he had been asleep, though his gaze betrayed something darker. When questioned about the smell and smoke coming from his property, Adolfo offered an explanation. A dog had bitten him, and in a desperate act, he had killed it and was burning the animal in his yard. However, the investigators' disbelief grew as they inspected the scene. When they removed the wood from the fire, they were met with horror. Amidst the remains, they discovered an earring and part of Genesis' dress. Then, they found a foot and a femur. The rest of the body was completely charred, making it impossible to identify. Adolfo was swiftly apprehended, but as news of the crime spread through the neighborhood, the outrage of the locals began to rise. The fury did not overflow, but it threatened to as the neighbors contemplated taking matters into their own hands, prompting the authorities to urgently intervene to prevent an outbreak of violence. Enraged, the mob attacked his home and set fire to the vehicle he used for work. Not satisfied, they then marched to the police headquarters, armed with sticks and stones, which they hurled in protest against the man during his initial interrogation. Adolfo, however, seemed oblivious to the gravity of his actions and claimed no memory of the details or reasons behind the crime. He described that he had been asleep and suddenly awoke with intense rage. In his fury, he saw Genesis walking past his house, made her come inside, and then recalled only that he was choking her with his hands. When he finally snapped out of it, it was already too late. Genesis had lost her life. The cruelty of the act shocked the Colombian nation, igniting widespread condemnation, grief, and solidarity with the Jaime family. Genesis' family was utterly devastated by the tragedy. In the little they managed to express, they turned to God for answers, grappling with the incomprehensible pain of the situation. Her mother, overwhelmed with despair, declared that even 100 years in prison would not be a sufficient sentence for justice. She struggled to comprehend how someone she had known since childhood could commit such a heinous act against an innocent life. In her agony, Genesis' mother urged others, saying, "Don't trust anyone. Take care of your loved ones. Cherish them. Spend time with them, not just on work. Show them love. Embrace them and talk to them. Don't let what happened to me happen to you. This pain is too great to bear." The unbearable grief and confusion consumed her, leaving a deep emptiness in her heart. She found herself unable to sleep, calming herself with medication only to fall back into a spiral of anguish. She expressed that the tragedy had stolen her will to live. Genesis' father, equally distraught, reflected on his daughter's future, her dreams of becoming a soccer player, and the way her face would light up each time she scored a goal. Her brothers, too, remembered her fondly, calling for justice and hoping that everything would be done properly to honor her memory and bring their family peace. Genesis' family vowed to pursue justice every single day. Don't trust anyone. They urged, always keep an eye on your loved ones. They awaited justice for the unforgivable act committed against their daughter. On the night of the crime, the neighborhood gathered in a spontaneous vigil. Candlelight illuminated the entrances of houses, and amidst their overwhelming grief, the community was resolute in their demand for justice. The shock of discovering that someone among them was capable of such wickedness left the residents reeling. They never suspected Adolfo until tragedy struck. For many, this served as an urgent call to parents everywhere to be more vigilant with their children. The neighborhood insisted that Adolfo's explanations were absurd and insufficient, demanding more from the authorities. At Genesis School, neither teachers nor classmates could comprehend the horror of what had happened. In her memory, they marched through the streets, united in sorrow. Her teachers remembered her as a bright, beautiful, and special child. The sadness over the injustice of losing such a young life in such a cruel way weighed heavily on everyone. In solidarity with the family, they carried banners calling for an end to violence, especially against children. So the entire community, including the Todos Foundation, was deeply affected by the event. One teacher, moved by the tragedy, recalled Genesis as an excellent student. She loved to draw, read, and excelled in her grade, particularly in mathematics. Despite being only in the 4th grade, she had already mastered multiplication. The march honoring Genesis concluded in front of her family's home, where white balloons were released in her memory, alongside a petition to end violence against children. The city's mayor joined the grieving families and neighbors, acknowledging the deep outrage the crime had caused. In response, the mayor declared a week-long prohibition on alcohol sales to reduce the risk of public disturbances. Meanwhile, Adolfo was transferred to the Aracataca prison as the community continued to seek justice for Genesis. Adolfo's arrival at the prison sparked security disturbances among the inmates, forcing authorities to transfer him to the Rodrigo de Bastidas prison in Santa Marta. As is the case in many prisons worldwide, an unwritten code seemed to exist among inmates, dictating especially harsh treatment for those convicted of crimes against minors. Upon his arrival at the new facility, Adolfo was again attacked by several prisoners, prompting an urgent transfer to a different cell block to ensure his physical safety amidst the nationwide uproar in Colombia. Amidst the chaos, a mysterious individual, whose identity was never revealed, hired a private lawyer for Adolfo. This attorney, Cesar Cadena, described his client as being in a severe mental and physical state. During their meeting, Adolfo barely spoke, often incoherent, repeatedly claiming he could not remember what had happened. 7 days later, an interdisciplinary team, including a forensic pathologist, an anthropologist, and a geneticist from the National Institute of Legal Medicine and Forensic Sciences, completed the examination of Genesis' remains. The results were even more distressing than initially feared. Despite the body's poor condition, the specialists were able to fully identify Genesis and confirm the community's worst suspicions. She had been a victim of abuse, and her death was caused by mechanical asphyxiation before her body was incinerated. The forensic report only intensified the grief and outrage within the family, the community, and the entire nation. Media outlets began referring to Adolfo as the monster of Fundación. On Friday, October 5th, from the early hours of the morning, a large crowd of Fundación residents gathered to accompany Genesis to her final resting place, united in grief and demanding justice. His parents, engulfed in grief, were accompanied by family members, neighbors, and schoolmates, along with children from various educational institutions. Together, they escorted the coffin from their home to a church where the wake was held. The procession advanced slowly through the streets, adorned with red roses and white balloons. Along the route, deep feelings of repudiation and a desire for justice resonated, accompanied by the somber sound of a school peace band, adding a note of solemnity to the emotionally charged atmosphere. Genesis family members wore T-shirts printed with a poem vowing to never forget her and assuring that she would always be with them. Whispers among the curious residents echoed sentiments about the profound impact the little girl had left on their hearts and how few had touched lives as she had at such a tender age. At the funeral, the vice president of Colombia at the time, Marta Lucía Ramírez, attended with her husband alongside the governor, the mayors of Fundación, political leaders, and high-ranking officials. The bishop of the Diocese of Santa Marta officiated the mass, referring to the crime as one that caused immense sorrow. He urged all citizens to cultivate a society where children truly receive shelter, respect, and protection. With Colombian society now clamoring for justice against the man who committed such a heinous act, he pledged to concentrate on the long struggle to prevent similar crimes in the future. He also remarked that Genesis would serve as an inspiration to prioritize the needs of children. Finally, he called upon the justice system for a swift process and offered specialized assistance to Genesis' parents and siblings, to help them cope with their loss. At the conclusion of the Mass, 100 mourners accompanied the child's body to the cemetery, where she was laid to rest. During this time, the President of Colombia used his social media platforms to demand thorough investigations and actions necessary for justice. He expressed his outrage, writing that as a Colombian and father, he condemned the cruel crime against the young girl and extended his solidarity to her family. In a video that circulated through the media, Adolfo, visibly distressed and tearful, offered an apology to Genesis' parents and the community, stating, "I truly don't even know what I did." The man would never have willingly opened the doors of his house to the police. On the contrary, as an unscrupulous individual, he would have heard them approaching long before they could catch him. However, this was not the case. He was consumed by regret over losing his home, his family, and the little he had left, all while praying for God's forgiveness. Genesis' parents lamented that they could never forgive the man who had taken their little girl from them, leaving an unfillable void in their lives. For them, there was no redemption for someone who had shattered their world. So on the same day that Genesis was laid to rest, Adolfo became the target of 2 assaults in the prison yard. In one of these attacks, there was an attempt on his life, prompting his transfer under strict protective measures to the maximum security prison of Valledupar, also known as La Tramacua. So a few days later, the first hearing took place. In front of the judge, the representative of the prosecutor's office spoke about the abhorrent actions of Adolfo, formally charging him with femicide and violent sexual assault, seeking a maximum sentence of 60 years. Strong evidence was presented, including reports of Genesis' body parts and clothes found in the man's residence, as well as a forensic report indicating that semen had been discovered in the remains of the little girl. The defense attempted to mitigate the severity of the situation, claiming it was an unusual case, and arguing that Adolfo allegedly had significant gaps in his understanding of his actions and did not comprehend the reasons behind his crime. The defense attorney even requested a psychological evaluation to support this claim. However, both the prosecution and representatives of Genesis' family rejected this request, insisting on the robustness of the evidence. The lawyer for Genesis' family argued that critical evidence had been lost when neighbors burned and ransacked Adolfo's home, alleging that the police had failed to secure enough evidence, which prevented the absolute truth from being uncovered. In response to the accusations of abuse, Adolfo firmly maintained his innocence, suggesting the possible involvement of other individuals. The attorney for Genesis' family dismissed the claim of temporary insanity, asserting that Adolfo was fully aware of his actions at the time of the crime. In his final statement, Adolfo presented a convoluted narrative that left everyone astonished. He confessed that he had been sleeping when a noise woke him, and upon looking out, he saw some children playing and making noise near his house. It was then, in an incomprehensible act, that he went outside, took Genesis and brought her into his home, where he ended her life. He admitted that he could not explain what compelled him to commit such an atrocity. The man accepted the charges of femicide but denied the charges of violent sexual assault. According to the country's laws, both cases should have resulted in separate convictions. For the charge of femicide, he faced a sentence of between 30 and 60 years in prison. However, if convicted of both crimes, the punishment would reach the maximum possible sentence. The prosecution anticipated that the sentencing for femicide would occur within 4 months, while the other charge would take approximately 1 year after the hearing details were disclosed. Reactions poured in swiftly as chilling new details emerged. An uncle of the girl revealed that he knew Adolfo through the neighborhood where they frequently crossed paths. He described Adolfo as a friend of the family who lived nearby and claimed he had never displayed any unusual or suspicious behavior that could indicate mental instability. Adolfo and Genesis' mother had known each other since childhood, having a cordial and polite relationship, though they were not close friends. On the day of the tragedy, Genesis' mother noted that there had been children playing in the street earlier in the afternoon, but by that time, the area was completely deserted. She recounted that Genesis had been on her way to visit an aunt who lived just a block away. It was believed that when the little girl knocked on the door and received no answer, Adolfo somehow lured her into his home, conveniently located directly across from her aunt's house. The man's apparent familiarity with the neighborhood likely made it easier for him to gain Genesis' trust. It seemed he had only sexual intentions, and for reasons unknown, he took the little girl's life. The mother emphasized that their family had never encountered any problems with him. According to local sources, however, a noticeable distance had developed between Adolfo and the neighbors in the area sometime before the incident. This tension was further intensified when Adolfo decided to install a barbed wire fence around his house, aiming to prevent anyone from sitting in his driveway, particularly the teenage boys who often gathered there. Following the crime, some neighborhood residents managed to speak with Adolfo's son to ascertain whether the man had previously exhibited any inappropriate behavior or aggression toward others. The unease grew when the young man disclosed that on several occasions, Adolfo had allegedly attempted to lure other children in the neighborhood by calling them over with the promise of candy and money in exchange for favors. Fortunately, those sinister intentions had not materialized, leaving many children unharmed. Amid the commotion and social outcry, there were calls for justice. Thus, on May 6, 2019, the verdict was read. Adolfo chose to exercise his right not to be present. His defense attorney, Jay, was there, as was Genesis' mother, who appeared visibly distraught. She wanted to bear witness to the punishment imposed on the man who had taken her daughter from her, while Benjamin, her husband, lacked the strength to endure the moment. The judge determined that Adolfo had planned and executed the abduction of Genesis against her will. He violently entered her home, abused her, and subsequently took her life before burning her body in his yard. As a result, he was sentenced to 53 years and 8 months in prison, with all future benefits denied. Adolfo would not be able to request home confinement or any hospital privileges. His sentence was to be served in its entirety within the prison walls. Although Genesis's family had hoped that Adolfo would receive the maximum sentence, they were pleased with the authorities' determination. Adolfo is likely to spend his last days in prison because, given his age and the pressure he has endured, it is impossible for him to leave there alive. However, as Genesis's mother once said, no sentence is enough, as no punishment will bring back her daughter, a little girl who had her whole life ahead of her. And so, boys and girls, we come to the end of today's video. A very sad and impactful case, just like all the ones we've discussed here. But as we always say, when minors are involved, the sadness is even greater. In all the topics we address, this man received an exemplary sentence. Unfortunately, as we mentioned in the video, this will not return Genesis to her family, but it does protect many children from a person who, according to his son, had already tried to harm others. He is a real danger to society and belongs in prison until the end of his days. If you found this video informative, please remember to give it a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I update the channel 3 or 4 times a week. And if you're subscribed, you'll receive a notification every time I upload a new video. See you next time for another case. Bye.